Indigenous people suffer from racism every single day.
It's always been here. It's been a premise for the formation of Canada and continues to be. The things that stand out most about myself that I would want people to know is being a dad. I have 2 teenage sons.
I'm a professor at the University of Calgary. I'm a sociologist.
I am Indigenous, Lenape, as I said, but I come from mixed ancestry.
I'm passionate about Indigenous advocacy. I work a lot in advocating for better health and better education for Indigenous peoples.
I'm here at the University of Calgary studying international Indigenous studies, planning on getting into the education field.
It's a fundamental characteristic of Canada.
They're polite racists, and I think a lot of people have good intentions and don't necessarily intend to be racist.
It's not just a white person that could be racist. It could be, many different people that, and in my own experience, I've had people in my community call down whatever kind of race that there is, not just one, but all of them.
There's systemic racism in the government, there's systemic racism in policing, in institutions, post-secondary institutions.
But the reality is we've all grown up in different ways and with different teachings, and sometimes those teachings weren't right, and what you might know as normal isn't culturally appropriate or not discriminatory when you're in a broader context.
For me, as a smart Indian girl, that it was very difficult for me in school because nobody expected anything of me.
I was constantly told by faculty within the school and staff and counselors,
The guidance counselor, the vice principal, the principal,
to please just don't get pregnant before you graduate. That was the bar that was set for me.
and they all came in one at a time to try and convince me not to go into university.
It wasn't what school do you want to go to, what do you want to be when you grow up. It was really just please don't get pregnant.
My professor kind of looked off into space and kind of looked back at me and said, "You're relatively well adjusted for an Indian."
What I can say is that that's been a consistent message throughout my academic life.
We have to stop looking at the Indigenous community as a series of pathologies and start looking at the resilience that we have in our communities as well as the knowledge that can help mainstream society.
All these small incidences added up to a time where I developed a thick skin to some of it to be able to go forth.
I don't even have to go that far back. I could probably even go back, probably to this morning, yesterday, But I choose really not to be bothered by a lot of that just because, there's only so much energy that I could give out.
I think what is most challenging now is to see my sons experience it too, in different ways, different experiences, as well as other Indigenous peoples.
Obviously, I am a white presenting person, and that comes with a great deal of privilege. So I know that I experience racism very differently from somebody who is immediately identifiable as Indigenous.
One son who's very visibly Indigenous. I've had to speak to him, for example, how to respond to police.
With my friends growing up, it'd be, well, why do you want to be Native? Like, you could live this way like everybody else does, but why is it that you're gravitating towards that? Or just that, full stop, you're not really Native. And that's coming from friends.
As I change my looks, what I'm noticing is that I get to hear more about people's views of Indigenous peoples because they're not as certain whether I'm Indigenous or not these days. And so part of the challenge is that's a whole difficulty in of itself, is hearing some very racist kind of comments and then having to identify myself as that I'm a member of this community And what you're saying is inappropriate, if not offensive.
For a lot of non-Indigenous people, it's so easy for them just to learn, like, you know, be in class session and learn about Indigenous people's issues, Black people's issues, but yet go back home and just have the privilege just to forget about it.
I feel comfortable sharing some of my personal experiences. So I shared in a class on social determinants of health what it was like to be an Indigenous mother going to seek care for your child, and how there is this innate fear about whether or not they're going to call a social worker on you because your kid fell at the playground and broke your arm. A very normal thing for kids to have happen. But when you're an Indigenous person, there's a huge fear on whether or not you'll be seen as neglectful and have your children taken away because our foster system is overrun with Indigenous children.
Going back to my community isn't, you know, it's the problems are there. You know, the issues are still there. I can't just go back to my home community and turn on the tap and drink the water.
And I shared this experience in a class, and I had a preceptor go, well, that used to happen, but that doesn't happen anymore. That shouldn't be something you're worried about.
They have to stop saying, oh, well, what do you expect me to do? I wasn't there.
I'm a believer of do unto others as others want done unto them.
Walk a mile in my moccasins, but, you know, I think it's easier said than done.
And that requires us then to learn about others and where they're at, and to accept that they have their own ways of going forth, and they don't need me to impose anything.
When people take the time to socially locate themselves, they're taking their time to understand the context in which they're walking through life. So myself, as a cisgender, heterosexual, Indigenous woman who is a mother, who grew up in a lower socioeconomic status, I recognize that I come to many conversations with that lens, because that's what I know, that's who I am.
It will take people to look at themselves and where they're at, and to address their own emotional baggage, their own emotional circumstance, whether that's fear or anger, and come to understand it in a deeper way.
Change isn't just going to happen overnight. I think, you know, with education, with like community engagement, I really do think, you know, generations from now, it will be sort of way better than what we have now. But that doesn't mean, oh yeah, just sit back and not do anything. Well, we have to change ourselves.
To understand something deeper means that we all have to go and learn more about people who are different than us. We have to spend that time understanding that it's possible to hold different values than what we hold.
I think in Canada we need to take a really hard look at who we are. We have to take a look at our history. We have to acknowledge the history.
And I want my other two kids who look visibly Indigenous to know that they have champions in their siblings, that they're there to take care of each other, that this world is going to be a safer place for them, because I fought hard to make it a better place for them, and I worked with my elders in my community to make this a better place for them